Hi, Agarwal, on behalf of Zycus, would like to welcome you all for an hour on building strategies for tomorrow, 10 megatrends for procurement and supply chain managers. Before today's webinar, I'd like to take you through a few housekeeping items. At any given point in time, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them on the chat box on the right-hand side corner of your screen. I want to introduce you to our today's speaker, Bill Michaels. Bill accompanies transform business strategies into maximum profit. He's an expert in purchasing and supply chain management. Bill is currently the CEO and founder of Edipart Consulting after more than 23 years at ADR North America. Known in the purchasing and operations management community and food and pharmaceutical industries. Bill is a sought-after speaker and writer with many publications, including co-authorship of the book Transform Your Supply Chain. Bill has a business and administration degree from Rochester Institute of Technology and an MBA from Baldwin-Wallace University. He has a number of certifications under his belt. I do now pass on the baton to Bill.
Okay. Thank you much. I have to thank everybody for attending the webinar. As a procurement and supply chain, we've really seen a rapid change in our environment, and I think we've only begun to see the changes we're going to see in the supply chain and procurement role. We look to the future. I'm always amazed with the changes I'm seeing in the digital world. Machines and software now are replacing human work. He is accelerating information flow. The Internet of Things is accelerating information flow, and we're seeing information moving faster and faster across the supply chain. Yesterday, my car told me I had to put air in the tire, so it's really a big change, and it's got a big change on the way that we look at the future. What we'll cover in this webinar is the global macro trends. So what's happening globally? We'll look at the evolution of procurement. We're going to look at 10 megatrends that impact procurement and supply chain for the future. And we're going to talk about some keys for success. And it's very important that we think about looking at these trends and identifying how we'll make changes. What will we do for talent management? What will we do for our organization development? How will we change the organizations to meet the trends? And how will our businesses change? So that's pretty what we'll cover in the webinar. I love this slide because I've lived all of these changes, and we're looking to see what's happening. And when we first started to notice procurement and supply chain in around the 90s, we noticed that there was a lot of focus on price. And then we looked at procurement teams focus on cost. We're going to drive, material, labor, overhead. We're going to control supplier margins. We're going to work with suppliers and get costs all under control. But typically, we tend to do it in the tier 1 side. Then we're starting to move to strategic sourcing. We're going to start looking at longer terms, global sourcing, moving, changing. Then we move into focused category management. And I think the next evolution for us is value management. I think we've done a great job as a procurement supply chain team over the years moving price and working on price and getting margins under control. But as we look to the future, we still need suppliers that are healthy, that are going to drive innovation. They're going to be able to invest in business, and we're going to be looking for more and more value from the supply chain. The changes globally, I think that the biggest change we're seeing now is change to digital. We're looking at the Internet of Things, devices communicating back and forth. We're able to track shipments automatically. We're able to manage inventories. We're starting to manage them automatically. And when we look at the digital and mobile future, mobile is a big piece because now we're connected to the entire supply chain 24/7. And most of the transactions we're starting to look at are going to be in the mobile side. So as we look to change our technology, we need to look at mobile future as part of the technology changes we're going to. The change in demographics. I wrote a blog not too long ago saying that the millennial team now is more than 50% of the workforce. Seeing a change to a different view on demographics, and that's changing. I think is kind of interesting because we're also seeing a contingent workforce. When we look at those millennials, it's estimated they'll have at least 25 jobs in their lifetime. And we're seeing more mobile contingent workforces specialized in key areas. So the customers we have are getting more and more value. They're demanding faster product life cycles, faster research and development, more services. So we're seeing a customer demand for value. We're seeing a universal change for corporate social responsibility in an interconnected world and sustainability. We're also seeing that we're not, the last couple of weeks will show you that we're no longer in a domestic economy, we're in a global economy. And what happens one place in the world impacts everybody else in the world. And I think that a lot of these changes are going to expedite supply chain. So we will have our supply chain, our competitors will have their supply chains, and we'll see that over time we'll have competing supply chains. So that's a big look at the global world. As the trends continue, they indicate that this will be operating on a global, connected global economy. Everybody will be connected. Information will be instant. The digital trend has driven speed to market, fast velocity, shorter life cycles on our products, increasing demands from our customers, inventories across the board, faster changes, more flexibility, and fast velocity. So those are the things that are really starting to drive as a result of the changes in the digital economy. I think 2015 is an interesting year. As I look at it, I see more and more mega mergers. And I see mega mergers. I see a lot of industry consolidation being driven across the supply chain. I was in the food business before going into the consulting business, and I can tell you that when I went into the consulting business, on the packaging side of food, there were suppliers. Maybe today there's two. Glass suppliers. Maybe today there's two, and the capacity has been sucked up. So we're seeing more and more mega mergers. We're seeing a lot of industry consolidation, and we're seeing consolidated supply chains that's moving toward limited competition. And it's going to change the way we do business, because as we look forward, integrating the supply chain and is going to be a critical part of the ways we work in the future. So as we look to consolidated supply chain and limited competition, the skill of supplier relationship management and driving a supply chain to meet the needs of our business are the paramount in either position, whether you're in procurement or supply chain. So we're going to be suppliers with integrated business systems responsive from end to end. And I think if you look in some of the leading companies today, you're seeing that level of integration. So going to see transparent networks aligned with common data objectives, all aligned for visibility and distributed profit as values added across the supply chain. I think that's going to lead, in the book I wrote, Transform Your Supply Chain, I predicted that's going to lead over time to competing supply chains. And we see some competing supply chains now, and I can give you some examples in just a moment. We look to the automotive industry, we're starting to see a separation between Japanese suppliers, the European suppliers, the Korean suppliers, and we're starting to see those supply chains now become competing supply chains. Supply chain networks of the future are going to be looking for incremental value. Every time we go out, we're going to have to increase levels of performance, levels of value, flexibility across the supply chain, and those suppliers that are those customers that are working with exclusive supply chains will be a source of competitive advantage. So if my supply chain is linear, my supply chain is more productive, my supply chain's got least cost, and most flexible, will win the competitive advantage war. So I think that's a key point that we need to look at. So what I'm seeing is that trends that face our industry are the rapid consolidation. We're starting to see that. There's been a loss of U.S. manufacturing, and it's distributed across the globe. Increased regulations impacting the supply chain and procurement, and the beginnings of the integration that I talked about. So that's going to lead to again, consolidating, driving, and really being an architect of what the supply chain is going to look like in the future. Who do we want to do business with? Who are the most competitive? Who are the most cooperative? Whose business objectives align with our company's business objectives? We're going to need that kind of architecture as we move forward, and it's going to be our role to be able to drive that architecture. Increased demand for sustainability. Those companies that are not going to be able to play in the sustainability game probably won't be a part of a supply chain that's architected. And we're going to see more and more sole sources of supply for critical items. And I have to learn how to work with those suppliers so that we can achieve as a unit some of the advantage. I guess the whole point of the trends that are facing supply managers on strategic alignment are going to be critical, and supply chain integration end-to-end is definitely a future need that we should be thinking about now. I know some companies are already moving down the path of integrated supply chain, but when I think about integrated supply chain, I think about fully integrated business systems, business objectives, profit, value add, speed, innovation, and high levels of performance. I think those are key things that we want to in our minds. So as we think about that, we have to figure out which of the suppliers that we're going to work with. And in mind, and in the teaching that I've had for a long time, we had 4 levels of suppliers. First one is competitive leverage. We've got lots of suppliers in the market. The impact of that supplier is not strategic to our business. Then proven suppliers are suppliers that have passed a few performance tests and we're confident in their performance, but they have not yet been able to drive the highest level of performance. Think about a third level of supplier, which is where I think most of us want to have our suppliers, which are performance-driven partnerships. They're partnerships based on high levels of performance, high levels of delivery, high levels of value, and that strategic alliance. I don't see very many strategic alliances as I go, because that typically shows interdependency in sharing of people, risks, investment, and very many strategic alliances. But when I think about this, when I think about how I want to align the supply chain, I have to be very, very careful, because it's very hard to get everybody up to that performance level, and it takes a lot of resource. So we want to make sure that the relationships we build in the supply chain are relationships that only fit our business needs. It's not that every supplier will be a performance-driven supplier. We have a range of suppliers in the supply chain, but we want to make sure that when we focus our resources and we focus our efforts, we focus them on the right types of suppliers and the right types of relationships. So that's a key point. I said this, in the first part of the webinar, that value creation will become one of the most important criteria in selecting suppliers. What supplier can give us more than price? And I think price over time will be playing a secondary role to value. I think we're looking at speed to market, in product development cycle times, innovation, cost management, and improved levels of service are going to drive far above a piece in the price. So I think when we look at our suppliers in the future, we're going to look at how can we create value and how are we going to get these key attributes in that supply base. Innovation is a driver of supply chain. It's going to be the transfer of innovation across the supply chain and suppliers in the supply chain that leads to faster speed of response and better specifications. We get a competitive advantage because we're in the supplier marketplace, and that supplier is driving our competitive advantage. We also will want a supply chain that transfers knowledge across the supply chain and drives on continuous improvement. So the links to the supply chain are going to be focused on driving opportunities. This is out of order, sorry about that. But it's supplier relationship management has to be a core competency. We have to be able to gain suppliers' trust, work with them, drive productivity, ensure that we're driving lean practices, not just across our Tier 1 suppliers, but across the entire supply chain. And when we build this relationship management as a core competency, we're going to get quicker cycle times, we're going to join investment, there's transparency across the supply chain, and we're going to, as I said before, align our objectives and business integration so that everybody in the supply chain wins by being a part of that supply chain, being the most competitive. So it's a real change as we move forward. It is really moving now. I mean, at one point it was U.S.-based, and another point we went after the low-cost country sources, and then we went for best country sourcing. But I think the reality is people say that manufacturing is coming back to the U.S., but the reality is the companies are, as a result of some of the risk problems that we've had with floods and some other things where production was interrupted, people have to realize that the best place is close to the customer. And if that means you have to duplicate facilities in Asia, the United States, and South America, and Europe, then you have to duplicate smaller facilities with smaller footprints that really facilitate portable manufacturing. And manufacturing plants will continue to have smaller foot plants. Technology is going to play a greater role in terms of enabling machines and software to replace more humans over time. So when we do say that manufacturing is coming back, it is, but the manufacturing is coming back, and the skill set that's needed is really those skill sets that can program the robots and drive the technology that's going to make the products we're looking for. And some markets will have rapid growth and bigger opportunities for manufacturing. But I think as we look into the future, we're not going to see us start everything in a low-cost country and try and ship it across the ocean with all the problems and costs and issues that we have. I think manufacturing move to where the customer base is. And it means duplication and additional resources, then that's what people are going to do. But I also think that technology is going to play a big role as we manufacture in the future. You know, I read Daniel Pink's book and I listened to him speak, and he was talking about we're going to have contingent workforces in the future. I think he's right. I think that the workforce is going to consist of specialists with entrepreneurial flair. I know that there's a whole need in our business, the purchasing business, for contingent purchasing folks to come in, build a strategy on a category, get it in place, execute it, and get out. As we talk about millennials, they're going to have a lot of changes in their job in their lifetime. They're going to move on for more and more and greater challenges. And, the digital evolution is producing a lot more younger entrepreneurs than ever before, and especially women. Companies will employ workers when they need them in the future. I think that this is a key change that will impact business as we know it, and probably impact the way that we look at our supply chains moving forward. I think global distribution is going to change as well. I think that, digitally we're going to be able to control our goods across the country. I know that at one point in my life, I did a lot of importing of foreign goods. And it was really interesting when we built business systems for those goods because there was a black hole. It was on commodities, so it was in the food business. We would order something from a foreign country, but be it Asia or Europe or even some small island like Madagascar, and we would find that we wouldn't set stuff until it cleared customs. It's a big black hole, but I think with satellite technology, distribution of goods is via big channels. It's going to have some issues, but it's going to show rapid growth markets and narrow the gulf between mature markets. And emerging markets will play a role because we'll be able to try things and drive things and distribute things from wherever in the world. On the skill sets. It's kind of interesting because I do a lot of work with a lot of teams, and as we look to the future in purchasing and supply chain role, we're going to see that influence becomes a more critical skill. Your ability to influence both internally and externally and collaborate across multiple business units and multiple organizations and coordinate all those activities is be a key part of your job. So influencing is extremely important as we move forward and integrate and compete. So management pros need to align and influence the internal stakeholders as well as suppliers across the chain. Driving an integrated supply chain, it influence analytics, collaboration, goal alignment, and the ability to build relationships both internally and externally with the stakeholders and the people. So I think that's a key point as we look forward in the future. All right, so alignment of the strategy is going to be important, and not only on tier one. So I think it's really interesting when I go in to the company and I look and I say, you have a risk management strategy. I'll into a group of 200 or 300 people, and everybody will raise their hand. And then I'll ask, how many people move beyond tier one in their risk management strategy? And that 90% of the hands go down. So I think the thing that's really important as we look at the trends in the future is to align our business strategy. And business strategy has to be transferred across the entire supply chain end to end. And that will get the transparency, speed, velocity, flexibility, and alignment future. Process cycles are going to continue to shorten, no doubt about it. You know, it comes out and everybody ditches their phone for the new technologies. So the cycle of a phone when it first came out was forever, and it's probably a year and a half or 2 years if you're lucky. And now with new programs coming out, you actually lease your phone and dump it in a year or two. So you're going to continue to see the shortening of product life cycles. So the last thing I think that's going to be important as we look at the changes in our industry are be agile, how to be flexible, we be able to get the transparency, which requires trust and management. So when we look at what we have to do, supplier relationship management, really have to be able to architect this strategy, drive strategy across the supply chain, align our suppliers' business goals with our business goals, and we need to dominate competition over time because we're going to have less and less stability as supply chains continue to consolidate. I think those are some of the trends that I have seen and looked at and researched. I think most of them will have a big impact on the way we look at things. So the question is, yeah, we see that. What do we do? Well, I need to know how to change. So when we get how to change, we got to look at what's the state of our organization. Where now in terms of supply chain alignment? Where's our management thinking on that? Where we align our objectives? How do we select suppliers? We have to really take a good look at the current state. We have to audit the supply chain, and we understand where all the links are, where all the risks are, what's the value created across that supply chain. Analysis on, okay, now know what the current state is, and we have to identify or create a best practice. Look at who's really good at this stuff, who can this, who does better than anybody else. And once we identify the very best practice, we have to get an implementation plan that gets us moving on change management to a different state. So, I mean, there's companies that will stay the and I lived in one of those technology companies a long time ago on my very first job. It was the typewriter industry. They decided they didn't want to stay in. They didn't move into printers. They went in and came out. Such an inkjet technology in the 80s, saying no one really is going to move forward on computers. They're going to stay in a big box back room. Well, they were wrong, and they're not around anymore. And they could have led the change had they made the change strategically. So we need to look at where are we, what's happening in the supply chain, what's best practice, and then how do we compare to that best practice. Now, so I think you can look at implementing a really good supplier relationship program. You've got to audit the supply chain, implement supplier relationship management, develop the key suppliers in that supply chain that are going to add value. You've got to customize the supply chain. So when I think of top-tier companies and integrated supply chain, I think of a company like Apple, where you order today, the components show up from wherever they do, all the suppliers are integrated, all the new product and value add comes from the supply chain, and it's one big effort across the supply chain to make it work. I think Toyota is a company like that as well. They have a master production system that everybody really envies, and actually they use and sell the technology on how to be like them. Walmart is one, and where I went to a client, and I worked in that client, and they were having trouble with their fill rates. Well, I didn't understand it because they were getting point-of-sale data out of the store every day, and they knew what they sent, they knew what was used, they knew what was consumed. So theoretically, they should have been able to set the order points when the stock was low, but they didn't. They put the stuff in a drawer and didn't look at it, and consequently kept running out of materials. We got to do suppliers. We got to customize the supply chain. We emulate those companies that are already on their way to integrating the supply chain, and that will take us away. Look at it. Well, you can wait for change and react, or you can think about how you're going to move and change your supply chain to meet that we're starting to see now. The trust may never happen, or they may, and if they do occur, you don't want to be the people on the front standing behind trying to figure out what to do next. So I think, you can either wait or you can start to make that change now. Use aggregated suppliers in a supply base, pushing on price management and not looking for the incremental value you can get, and trying to find ways of driving that performance and calculating the metrics from the value. Or you can move in a more strategic direction and start to really focus on how to build a new supply chain, how to drive a new supply chain forward. So those are some key opportunities that you have to decide. So what will you do? Option 2. As we look, I wanted to kind of leave today with a couple quick notes. If you have an integrated supply chain, it really is going to depend on transparency. It's really going to depend on top-to-top alignment on strategy. It's got to be a core. You've got to be able to get innovation from that supply chain. I worked in a company that was totally vertically integrated, and they believed at the time that they could produce everything they needed, and they did. I mean, steel and pellets came on one end of the building, machines came out the back end until the technology changed. You cast at every technology, and you want suppliers that are the best in their technology and the ones that can drive the innovation and drive the change, and then work with you in an exclusive way so that you get the competitive advantage with speed to market first. I think any supply chain, you've got to have flexibility. You have to be able to negotiate strategically. I can tell you that when you start working with supplier relationship management and you strategically aligning your suppliers, your negotiation process has to change from one of tactics to one of principle, where you identify all the principles that drive the relationship. Cost transparency, speed to market, how pricing is going to be handled over time, what's the mechanisms for increasing price, what's the mechanisms for reducing price, and really, those are all based on key principles. So when you negotiate, you change from a tactical approach to a more strategic approach, and that's going to be a big change for many companies. We will be talking at some point with our suppliers about joint investment, least cost production, levels of value, and most of all, trust. For years and years, what we've done is we've beat the supplier up for price, then we said we want you to disclose your cost. No wonder they don't want to do it. It doesn't surprise me because they've never been able to trust. And I think that's a big change that we have to really focus on as we go forward. So that's a half hour, a lot of content in a half hour. I want to leave you with one thought. The guy I worked for at one point in my career, David Johnson, he was at Entenmann's Bakery and then became chairman of Campbell Soup Company. And David said our suppliers are only as good as we let them be. And I don't believe that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ankit to field the questions, or at least give me the questions, and we'll we can answer some.
Thanks a lot for the insightful presentation. This question is, developing a supplier relationship program, what are some of the considerations?
I think when you develop it, it's going to be which forecastes a supplier, which suppliers are we going to spend our time with. Well, it would make sense if we have 10 or 12 suppliers in the competitive leverage side. It wouldn't make sense to spend a lot of time with those suppliers, but it would make sense in the evolution of suppliers where we're trying to drive performance-driven suppliers. You know, you're going to use parts of your organization, probably the technical parts, the commercial parts, to work with suppliers. So I think you'd be very careful about which suppliers you select, because if you think you're going to have a relationship with the whole supply chain, you don't have enough resources. So I think you have to be very selective about it. You have to start working on those suppliers that have a strategic input to you and can deliver you the most value. So I think be careful about which ones you select first, and pick the ones that you really want to start aligning with first, and then start moving down the chain as you need to.
The question is, how do you quantify value?
That's an interesting question. If I have to think about it, I have to think about the things I mentioned in this chart. How do you get speed to market? What your suppliers bring in the innovation? Can you get the business unit to line? And then you have to look at what's the speed to market worth to you in terms of financial analysis. So if you get 1 or 2 weeks sooner on a product, I'll give you a great example. I worked in the glass industry, and we look at rebuilding furnaces. So if a furnace lasts an extra 2 or 3 years because you've put different factory bricks in, then you don't have to take it out of production. You're not losing production. You're not losing that line. So the value of that is very, very high for that company, even though the price price reduction may be an instant win. Being able to use the furnace 2 years longer is a quantum leap forward. So I think it's how do you quantify that value? Well, that's huge value. So if you drive a supplier to do a key thing, and then that leads you to a competitive advantage. In my career, we came up with new ways of being tamper evidency, and they were exclusive. So we had tamper evidency that was beyond our competitor, and we had that for 2 years. And that gave us competitive advantage in the marketplace. So I don't know, you have to quantify it from what's the competitive advantage that you get from the relationship with that supplier.
Great. So we have quite a lot of questions. One interesting question is from Zachary Dean, and the question is, how can we show supplier trust, advantages, knowledge transfer, and supplier continuous improvements into our KPI dashboard metrics? Often only measure cost savings, cost avoidance, etc.
I think that this has got to be an educational change, and it has to occur across the organization, even at the top. So while we get those cost measures, getting those value measures, I think it's what is an exclusive innovation worth to the company. What is getting the faster to market worth to the company to be first in the market? I know I do some work in pharmaceuticals and biotech. If you get the patent,
I guess we lost Bill due to technical error. Bill for insightful presentations, and thanks to every one of you for joining today's webinar.